it's time for a brief history of the United States of America. Hi, boys and girls, ready to get started? Once upon a time, there were these people in Europe called pilgrims, and they were afraid of being persecuted. So they all got in a boat and sailed to the New World where they wouldn't have to be scared ever again.
Oh, I'm so relaxed.
I feel so much safer.
But as soon as they arrived, they were greeted by savages, and they got scared all over again. So they killed them all. Now, you'd think wiping out a race of people would calm them down, but no. Instead, they started getting frightened of each other. Witch! So they burned witches. In 1775, they started killing the British so they could be free. And it worked, but they still didn't feel safe. So they passed a Second Amendment which said every white man could keep his gun. I loves my gun. Loves my gun. Which brings us to the genius idea of slavery.
Welcome to a very special episode of The Fog of Truth. As we all know, as we've been paying attention to the news, there have been not one, not two, not three, but a whole lot of mass shootings. And there has been a lot written in newspapers and magazines, online, on Twitter, and any place where you can hear any opinion. As I was thinking about what was going on, I was thinking documentaries have a very special role here. Because all the stuff that we're reading is response to a specific moment. And what documentaries can do that are really powerful is take a very thoughtful approach and to put it into perspective in a way that something in the newspaper or in some magazine is just not going to be able to do. What I decided to do this week is ask our co-hosts to each pick one film that deals with guns and have a bit of a discussion about it. Why don't you go first?
I watched The Price of Freedom. Judd Ehrlich is the director of that film, which is currently screening on HBO Max. And it is the story of the NRA from the beginnings and showing how the organization transitioned from being about sporting and with marksmanship to the political hellscape that it is now, and how it was taken over by those entities at some point, most notably a guy named Harlan Carter, who literally was a convicted murderer, who had his conviction vacated by a judge thanks to white guy's justice, changed one letter in his name so that people couldn't trace who he was or his background, and he turned the NRA into what it is today, which of course is, in my considered opinion, a terrorist unit. So I'll go there because it just made me mad. The documentary just made me mad, just like everything else that's going on right now. So there you go, The Price of Freedom.
So John, did they talk about what led to that sense of transformation? Aside from the in-house political stuff, there is an external factor that definitely has an influence as to why that change happened in the NRA and what it really means to us. And I don't know if you know this story. In the early days of the Black Panther Party, they figured out that they could carry guns on the streets of Oakland to essentially look at what the police were doing, that there was a loophole. And so they went to Sacramento into the State House and they were just going to protest. But they were walking around the building and they just happened to walk in to where the legislators were holding court. And it just so happened that there was somebody shooting 16 millimeter film of this, which then went on the nightly news.
I have these Black Panthers up here with guns on the second floor. Check.
And so America was confronted with black men in black leather jackets with guns.
Correct. And
that is the moment.
And that legislation, which ironically now, based on the fact that we have constant legislation to put a gun in everyone's hand, regardless of age, regardless of capability, regardless of any sense whatsoever, that their legislation was actually passed to prevent people from having guns, which was pushed in a very strong way by Ronald Reagan while he was the governor of California. And then, of course, he did a complete 180 when he became president, when it didn't become about threatening scary black people with guns, but allowing white people and everybody else to have guns. So, yeah, that is addressed in this documentary.
Yeah, I think it's a really important point because there are several reasons why some Americans want to have guns. And certainly one of them is, I am afraid of black people coming and invading my house. And that's irrational fears, but that's where they are. Then, of course, there are some people who are afraid that the government is going to come after them and they need to be able to protect themselves. But I think that tying this issue to race clearly is a valid point. And I think that's an important thing. Again, what a documentary does is brings us the sense of how do we get to this moment. So, Justina, what did you watch?
Okay, so I like knowing what people in other countries think about our gun culture. So I stumbled on this documentary on Netflix.
Every day I carry a Glock 19, and that gun is actually feels to me like an extension of my body.
It's a 2018 film, and it's made by Austrian documentarians Fritz Offner and Eva Hausberger. And while it says it's about the Glock, which is a global weapon of choice, it bookends with America's gun culture. And by bookend, 20 whole minutes on Chicago gun violence and overall American gun culture.
Boy, this gun has changed the firearm industry in a huge way for the better.
Oh, yes, this is real popular. Almost, I'd say 60% of the Chicago Police Department have it.
The Glock is a gun of choice in my community.
30 minutes max on the Austrian Glock maker, and then another 20 minutes on Iraq and America's relationship to that. That includes seeing the Glock Saddam Hussein had when he was killed and how it was given as a gift to President Bush, and the symbolism being that we took Hussein's power to open the doors of freedom. So that's very powerful symbolism. That's the best Mark Glock could have, which definitely they go into in the documentary about how Americans are free marketing for this manufacturer. And then the middle's fascinating because the cult of Glock, just like the followers are fascinating in Scientology, but it's even more crazy on the inside. Same thing with Glock. There's a bunch of insanity that he could have done, but they really do focus on how we are the free marketing for Glock and why it is a multi-billion-dollar industry. We give it free marketing in our music, in our movies, and in real life murder. The most important or most powerful moment for me is he interviews a reformed gang member in the beginning who's very honest about the addiction of gun violence, that your gun keeps you alive at first, and then it becomes your ally. It saves your life. And then the moment you shoot it at another person, it becomes an addiction.
You're shooting behind that gun. You get high, it becomes an addiction. And that's one of the worst addictions I could have probably ever picked up, was the addiction of shooting a gun.
And just as this reformed gang member says this so very honest, brutal thing, it immediately cuts to this sweet, cherubic woman on her porch in middle America saying how the Glock is an extension of her. Her screensaver on her phone is her Glock and the Constitution. And then it basically ends with how police officers have Glocks, criminals have Glocks. And then we get more immersed in the gun culture and all over America of how people collect dozens of Glocks in one home, and then cuts right back to Chicago and women, mothers, wailing for their children that they lost. And it is so powerful to see that change. Sorry, I cried this much when I watched it too. And then it basically ends with how police officers have Glocks, criminals have Glocks, military people have Glocks on both sides, like in Iraq, both sides have Glocks. It is so abundant. It's like candy around the whole globe. The way one past executive for Glock puts it, that when you get past the atrocity of it, the gun violence is actually the best marketing because the message is that it works.
Clearly, these very unsafe instruments of mass destruction are deep within our popular culture. The thing is that now, just like in the last 4 or 5 years, people are just pissed off at a level that I just don't remember. The level of just absolute anger combined with the level of guns is just a really bad mix.
We've been at the least upset since the 80s. In the movie, it talks about how Glock became commercially available in 1983. And we actually coined the phrase going postal in 1991. So really, I don't know, maybe it's a Gen X thing that we didn't get angry. We just got exhausted. But it, but we've been wondering, like, why do we have to kill so many people? Like, people are about going into their workplaces and killing people as early as, I guess, 77 or so. So we've been talking about this for a long time. I think finally, I think we're hearing it. I hope we're hearing it.
Well, between this and other issues, we're really in a stark way seeing the fruits of minority rule, because the vast percentage of people in the country want really strong gun reform laws. And it's overwhelming. It's like in the 80 percentile between ID checks to red flag laws and yet we have politicians who represent a fraction of the population that are impenetrable. And so you combine that with the messaging, which has been incredibly successful by the NRA and other groups, to tie gun ownership to patriotism and to tie gun ownership to manliness, to tie gun ownership to property ownership. And so I have no confidence whatsoever that we are actually going to get legislation to change it. So that's just
I'm slightly optimistic. There are some Republicans just even today that have been talking about trying to do something. I don't know that it's going to be massive, but I think that something has got to change. But and I agree with all of the things you said, John. I also think that there are a lot of people who just feel like they've been left out, like they have no sense of opportunity, that all these people are doing well and they're not. And instead of being mad at the Republicans for what they've done to put them in that situation, just the act of holding a gun, and particularly an AK 47, makes a person who does not feel like they have power feel like they have power, because they literally have the power over who lives and who doesn't. And if your parents are complaining, your teachers are complaining, you can't get a date. Holding that weapon gives you a place and makes you feel better about yourself. And
right,
I don't know how to fix that.
But then and to bring this back to why we're doing this, rather than the three of us go off on our obvious feelings of this. What you said at the very beginning of this discussion, Bart, is absolutely correct, because whether it be how Justina's documentary broke it down to one specific brand of weapon and all that, or whether the NRA shows how they crafted this messaging, and in spite of, like, they showed how gun shootings went down thanks to the assault weapon ban, the Brady bill, and then saw how they exponentially blew up again when that was allowed to lapse in 2004. And then each documentary can show in stark detail both the heartbreaking life experience, like Justina saw, and those films also can detail those things that a news broadcast can't, because a news broadcast or a political debate show is only going to hit it from a certain angle, and it's only going to give you a couple minutes. But over an hour and a half time, when you can really delve into that, it can make the argument in a way that nothing else can.
The thing about the movie that I saw was that because it talked to people in the military and people from gangs and 2A enthusiasts, it was very clear that a lot of, if not all, our gun violence, as you were saying, Bart, comes from feelings of oppression or the oppressor being threatened because the oppressed are fighting back or may fight back. And I can definitely agree with both sides of the gun debate when we say this is an all of the above problem. A lot of our violence in America stems from the oppression, racial oppression and economic oppression. So
Yeah, just think about what was it, a couple years ago during the Black Lives Matter, when you had that couple on their lawn with the AK-47 as an image. I mean, it says it all right there.
Yeah.
Oh my God, we have black protesters here. Got to get out the AK-47.
And here's the thing, like, if you look, like, we separate, and we're doing that right now with how we create the language around gun violence. Like, we separate mass killings by groups from single mass killers because it makes us feel more distant. But in the end, the Tulsa Massacre starts with gunshots. Like, gun violence is so prevalent in racist history.
Yes, which brings us to Bowling for Columbine, the granddaddy of gun movies. And when was the last time you guys saw Bowling for Columbine?
Oh, in the
Recently?
theater. In the theater.
Yeah. And
Yeah, easily a decade.
2002.
Two decades.
That's a long time ago. Before I went to rewatch it, I remembered pieces of it. And the most thing that I remembered was the Charlton Heston interview at the end, which is really uncomfortable in many ways. And we'll get to that when we get to the end. But I forgot about so much of what made this film work. And of course, it is triggered, bad term, by the Columbine tragedy in 1999. Of course, it won Academy Award for Best Documentary. It got an award at Cannes. It was, at the time, one of the highest grossing documentaries ever made. And I think even more than Roger and Me, it really solidified Michael Moore as a major player in the documentary world. And as many of his documentaries are, this is like very segmented. It's like episodic elements. And I'll walk you through some of this stuff, which you sure have not remembered for a long time. But do you remember the sequence where he goes into a bank, and if you open up an account, they give you a rifle?
Yes.
Can I help you?
Yeah, I'm here to open up an account.
Okay, what type of account would you like?
I want the account where I can get the free gun.
And he fills out the paperwork.
Have you ever been adjudicated mentally defective, or have you ever been committed to a mental institution? Well, I've never been committed to a mental institution. What does that mean? Have I ever been adjudicated mentally defective?
Would be something involved with a crime.
Oh, with a crime. Okay. So if I'm just normally mentally defective, but not criminal.
Exactly.
There you go, Mike. Okay, thank you very much. Wow.
And he walks out at the end, and he's got this gun. And that's pretty much how he begins this journey. And then there are two of these really great musical, almost kind of music video things. There's the Beatles' Happiness is a Warm Gun, with a lot of just images of people that had died with gun abuse. And then after that, there's What a Wonderful World, Louis Armstrong. And what that is, the United States, murdering Pinochet, all kinds of political assassinations and political violence, making the case, this is what happens in the United States. And then he talks about how fear is portrayed on television all the time, that any news story, all they're trying to do is make you afraid. And that was even before Fox News was what it is now, which is just doing nothing but making people feel afraid all the time. So then he goes up to Canada and he looks at what TV is like in Canada, and people are nice to each other. In fact, there's one sequence where he goes from house to house and people don't even lock their doors. And they say, "Why, you don't lock your door?" "No, I'm not worried about it. I don't lock my door." And then he goes through the numbers in Canada. Okay, so Canada is not that different from the United States, much less violence. And then it has this interview with Marilyn Manson, which I think is very interesting, particularly what we're going to talk about in next week's episode.
I definitely can see why they would pick me, because I think it's easy to throw my face on a TV, because I'm, in the end, sort of a poster boy for fear, because I represent what everyone's afraid of, because I do and say what I want.
If Marilyn Manson can walk into our town and promote hate, violence, suicide, death, drug use, and Columbine-like behavior, I can say, not without a fight you can't.
The two byproducts of that whole tragedy were violence and entertainment and gun control. And how perfect that was the two things that we were going to talk about with the upcoming election.
And then, I don't know if you remember the Kmart sequence. They got two of the students from Columbine who have bullets in them. And they go to the Kmart's headquarters, because the gun was purchased at a Kmart. And they said, we want to return the bullets that are in them. And so they just get some lackey, and they say they're not going to do anything. So then they went to a Kmart and bought a lot of ammunition and brought the press back to Kmart and said, "We want to give you back these things, and we want you to promise not to sell ammo at Kmart."
My name's Lori McTavish. I'm the Vice President of Communications for Kmart. I'm happy to deliver a statement on behalf of the company. What happened in Columbine, Colorado was truly tragic and touched every American. And we're sorry for the disadvantage to this young man. Kmart is phasing out the sale of handgun ammunition. The business plan calls for this to be complete in the continental U.S. within the next 90 days. Kmart representatives met with Mr. Moore and the students from Columbine, Colorado yesterday and listened to their concerns about the product carried in Kmart stores. The company committed at the end of that meeting that Kmart would have an answer for them within a week's time.
Well, the first thing we want to do is thank you for committing to no longer selling handgun ammunition in your stores. And within 90 days...
The process will be phased out within 90 days.
And after 90 days, there will be no more selling of ammunition that can go into handguns or assault weapons.
Firearm ammunition, we will not sell it after 90 days in our stores.
Well, we greatly appreciate that.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
We have a copy of the Documentaries.
Thank you. Wow, that blows my mind. That's more than what we asked for.
That's kind of a big deal. How do you get a sense of change? But that is like what Michael Moore does. He creates a situation where he puts pressure on people to do things. And by confronting them, they have to rethink it, which takes us to the very uncomfortable Charlton Heston scene. Do you all both remember that scene?
Yes.
So for those who don't remember, he gets one of those maps of the stars and finds out where he lives and goes to the driveway, hits the button on the intercom and says, "Hi, this is Michael Moore. I'd like to interview you." And they arrange to come back later. And so he walks in and he starts to have this discussion. And at the beginning, it's very nice because Michael Moore is a card-carrying member of the NRA and he grew up in a culture of guns. And then he starts talking about, why did you decide to speak at an NRA thing in the cities right after they happened? And Charlton Heston did not respond to that very well. And the thing is that, yes, it's good to confront these people, but at this point, Heston is pretty old, and I don't think his mind was working that. And I really felt uncomfortable for both of them. What we have to remember is that Charlton Heston was the one going to those NRA meetings and famously saying, "Not till you pull that gun out of my cold dead hand." He is the sort of symbol of what that gun means. So confronting him and making him think about it. And at the very end, he leaves with a picture of one of the people that died in one of the shootings for him to look at. So this is the film, I think, that really started to get people to think about things. The question is, though, did it change the needle on anything? Yes, there is a deeper awareness of this, but certainly that film certainly got a lot of attention, but no legislation came out of it, which is very sad. And by the way, you can watch this for free on Tubi. But you just have to watch an ad every once in a while, but free is good.
John and our film is on Tubi now.
Oh, really?
We're pro Tubi. Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, we are team Tubi.
All right. So let's put the link to your film in the show notes.
Well, we have to be very clear. Our film is not a documentary.
Oh,
yes.
really?
And there is gun violence in it, but it's
in a certain way, it's a document of your house.
Here's the thing that I wanted to say about Bowling for Columbine, and I remember very distinctly when the film came out, and of course it was a cause celeb, it was a big deal, and it was also looked upon as a missed opportunity because of Michael Moore's style as a filmmaker, making an entertainment piece and also straying from the kind of stock documentarian objectivity and letting the facts speak for themselves and staging things that I remember that people on the gun control side of the issue were like going, he completely messed up, because it automatically turned off anybody who might have been shaded on the fence or shaded on the conservative side of the issue, because it was so stridently and so overwhelmingly skewed toward one side, and it was upsetting on that level. Which, and again, he's that that is a constant refrain with his films, is that you go, listen, this should be a slam dunk if presented in a straight manner for people to figure this shit out. But now you've blown it because your ego inserted yourself into the film and also inserted your opinion in the film.
Okay, but I want to respond to that, because I think what's great about that is that Michael Moore empowered our egos to start saying something. That I was saying, I was baffled by the Gen X culture of seeing it start to us unraveling and going postal, and all the times that there were workplace shootings. When you saw Bowling for Columbine, we were like, oh wait, I can say something? I had no idea. And that is how we get to the advocates we have today.
And look, I think there has been a camp of filmmakers, advocacy filmmakers, from Emile D'Antonio, who did the films about Nixon and Point of Order, and there has been a long streak of documentaries that have advocacy. You know, the same people that complained that Michael Moore has a point of view are now making crazy films on the right wing about this 2000 Mules thing, Dinesh D'Souza. Even people on the right think it's crazy. But they have no sense of objectivity. Unfortunately, we are living in somewhat of a post-fact world, or at least there aren't facts that we can all agree on, which is a real problem. There are documentary filmmakers that come from a point of view, but they're still documenting things that happened. And certainly one can say that Michael Moore pushes it by inserting himself into a situation, creating a situation where people have an effect. Whereas an observational documentary filmmaker would not do that, the umbrella of documentary sort of allows for that to happen, as long as it's known that's what's happening. I mean, I just love the way he does some of that. Which was the film where he was going around during one of the wars and saying, so are we going to sign up your son to go fight in the war? He went, which I thought was the most amazing thing, that people who are sending other people's children to go to war, just one of those moments where, you know, you cringe because that person felt incredibly uncomfortable, but they had to think about something in a new way. And we, as an audience, feel about it in another way. I think that Columbine, because it was so successful, a lot of people saw it and they understood the issue a little differently. And if you are constantly worried about how other people will be criticizing you, you never get anything done, because they're going to criticize you anyway. Right? But your point is very well taken. So after these documentaries, who wants to go out and buy a gun?
And here's the thing, John knows. I love guns. I love shooting guns.
There's one thing about wanting to have guns around. It's another thing to have power over other people. But I personally never want to have a gun in my house. I just do not want that to be there. I feel like in some level I've surrendered to the awfulness of the world by having to. So I just don't want one.
The idea that, that a gun is used as a sporting kind of thing, that's great. Justina, we joke that during the zombie apocalypse, Justina handles the guns because she's a much better shot than I am, and I would handle the driving and carrying heavy things. But that, again, you're using it as a sporting weapon.
But which one of you will document it?
All right, Bart, you can join our team.
A lot of the anxiety that people get are from watching, say, Fox News or OAN. And the information they're getting is, as in Bowling for Columbine, making people up their fear constantly. And what I think I want to end this with is the documentaries can take a thoughtful approach. Instead of instilling fear, you can understand how we got here. You can understand the issues in a very deeper way. There's a level of thought that comes into it. You may not have the answer, but you have a way of thinking about it and processing that. And what I'm going to do in the show notes is in my last newsletter, videofest.news, I made a list of a bunch of other documentaries. So we'll give you, after this, you'll probably want to go back and watch these. And there are some others that you can see. And I've got the places where you can see them. While you're feeling very bad about the situation, watching a documentary can at least make you feel like you're getting yourself to a better place about knowing about what's going on. And with that, thank you for listening to The Fog of Truth. Fog of Truth musical theme composed by Jeremiah Moore, composed for the podcast and used by permission. If you have any questions, you can email us at disinfo@fogoftruth.com. Thank you guys for indulging me in this special episode. It's oftentimes when things like this go on and you feel like you just want to do something, well, this is what we can do. And I think that's a good thing.